Today, being French in Brussels is a bit of an issue for me because I'm not exactly proud of my country and not exactly proud of some of my, fellow MEPs, members, of the European Parliament. Deep-sea bottom trawling is the ultimate destructive fishing method because it's deployed in a very, very fragile marine environment where animals live long, they reproduce late, they have very little, low fecundity, so very few young every year. So we are really targeting, the most fragile marine environments with the biggest possible gear. That's very heavy, that's dragged along the seafloor, and that really destroys everything in its wake. The animals that are found in the deep sea are very often deep sea corals, for example, that live dispatched all along the seafloor. Deep sea sponges and deep sea corals can live individually up to more than 4,000 years of age, so they actually hold the record of the biggest longevity in the animal kingdom on the planet right now. Dragging these big weights along the most vulnerable environment that exists in the sea is equivalent to having huge nets that are dragged across, let's say, Egypt, that destroy the pyramids, take the mummies, which are 4,000 years old, and throw them away as if they were garbage and they were just void of any kind of meaning for humanity, and there's no sense of patrimony at all. So right now we are confronted with, on one hand, having this complete aberration from an ecological perspective and also from an economic point of view. It turns out that these big fishing boats, which are industrial in size, over 30, 40 meters very often, are not even profitable. And they're subsidized by our own tax money. So we have an ethical, an economic, and an ecological problem. We can solve it. This regulation, which is now pushed by some European policymakers and some politicians, is just the right thing to do. It seems just so obvious. But we are confronted to industrial lobbies. There are very few people out there that are concerned by this regulation. It turns out that there's only 11 boats in Europe that fish deep sea species more than 3 days in the year. 9 of them are French. And so now we have this situation where France is really leading the resistance to try to make sure that this regulation is sort of deprived of any kind of meaning and content. And it's up to other policymakers to step up, and the public opinion basically in media to step up and say, okay, we don't want this. Nobody wants this. Who does it benefit? Certainly not taxpayers, because it costs us, And shall we be actually writing a regulation in order to protect less than 10 boats in France? No, we can't. France cannot impose a regulation on the rest of Europe. So it's a diplomatic game because France is really showing teeth. And whether it be left or right, Sarkozy or Hollande governments are just acting in this exact same way. Totally absent in terms of any kind of, ambition from an ecological perspective. So I really call on people, on, common sense, on goodwill, to put pressure on Hollande, on our government, to actually remind them that, hello, they're not supposed to be acting in favor of Intermarché, which is the leading firm, which is a giant retailer in France, which owns those ships that are mostly involved in deep sea fishing. So they're not supposed to be acting as their sales reps, of a single firm in Europe. They're our nation. We elected these people. We want them to represent, our, the common stakes, the common good. So we've put together a petition which calls on Hollande to find some dignity and to give dignity back to the diplomats, which are, the French diplomats, which some of them must be so depressed to have to defend those indefensible positions in Europe. So, please go ahead and sign our petition and share it.